Today is day 10 of our holiday and it's our last cycling day. So as it's a special occasion, we decided to take the train so that we can go down the other end of the island and experience some different roads. We'll be getting off at Santa Maria del Camí and cycling up to Valdemosa, then along the roads across the northern part of the island, eventually hoping to go down to Sa Calobra and finally back to our hotel. Okay, we've left the railway station and started our ride. Now, the ride we're on isn't particularly long, about 130 kilometers. However, it's got about 2,500 meters of climbing in it. Because of that, I'm not that confident that my e-bike battery will last all day. So I've been taking some precautions. The first of which is to leave the motor switched off for the flatter sections and the mild uphills. We're getting close to Valdemosa now. Luckily we've come off the big horrible main road and now we're on this tiny track up into the village. Now I've gained about 200 meters of elevation, and for most of that I've tried to keep the motor off, so I was preserving electricity. However, in the end I relented and put the motor on. One of the problems with this e-bike system I've got on here is that when I'm going uphill and I change gear, maybe into a lower gear or a higher gear, the force through the pedals just backs off slightly, the motor turns off, and then when the gear settles in and I can start pedaling normally again, the motor kicks back in. So the motor sort of turns on and off as you're changing gear, which is not very helpful. It's probably more helpful than my brother's muscle bike though. We're in Valdemosa, probably about 20 kilometers into the ride, and we've decided to stop for coffee. Gracias. The other precaution I've taken is I brought the charger with me. This northern coast road is just spectacular. We've just left Solia, which is almost at sea level, and now we've started one of the major climbs, which I think goes up to about 800 meters, and we're just going to tap this one out at a good gentle pace. As far as my e-bike is concerned, I've still got 4 lights on it, 4 out of 5, because I've been trying to preserve the battery. So over the last 40 kilometers and about 500 meters of climbing, I've only used 1 light, or about 20% of the battery. Let's see what it's like when we get to the top of this big climb. We might see how David's battery is holding up too. That's his physical battery. I'm now about 55 kilometers into my ride. My e-bike battery is running low, so for the last couple of kilometers of uphill I've turned the motor off. I've still got just under 200 meters of ascent on this climb before I reach the top. Now I'm getting range anxiety because Do I use what little charge I've got left in my battery, or do I keep it? I hope I can find somewhere to charge my battery. Well done, Dave, almost at the top. I made it to the top with one light showing on my battery charge indicator, and it seems to be running on the low power mode, so the battery is almost exhausted. And then before we knew it, we were on the way down. Coming down that very big descent, and I'll post a time warp video of that descent in another posting. However, for now, we're going to eat cake, drink tea and coffee, look at the view, and get ready to reascend the long climb back up. I'm just starting on my way up the Sa Calobra climb. I've managed to charge my e-bike battery, and it's showing 3 charge lights out of 5. I'm not sure that's going to be enough to get me to the top, so I'm starting out without using the battery while my legs are still fresh. I've come up about 170 meters without using the motor. After this chasm here, I think I'll turn the motor on, see how far it gets me. Okay, motor is going on. You've just been watching the final day of my cycling holiday with my brother. On that ride, we've gone for an epic journey across the northern mountains and north coast of Mallorca. In the end, we did 150 kilometers and 2,500 meters of climbing. The idea was to test myself and my hired e-bike to see how it coped with such an epic ride. Now, I was fairly confident that battery wouldn't last for the whole ride, so I took my charger along with me, and part of the reason I did that was to see whether taking the charger with me is a good alternative to, say, an extender battery. However, when I got back to the UK and started looking at my GoPro files, I found some of them were missing and some were corrupt. So I can't end the story of our final day using original Mallorcan video footage. My apologies that the scenery isn't very Mallorcan. However, we do have plenty of spring flowers in the UK. Now, through the magic of imagination, let's pretend we're back in Majorca. I just turned my e-bike on, and I looked down at the charge indicator and it was showing 3 lights. Good, I thought. Unfortunately, within about 30 seconds it had dropped down to 2 lights. Anyway, I kept riding the bike up the hill as fast as possible, trying to preserve as much of the battery as possible. Unfortunately, with about 200 meters of elevation gain to go to the top, the bike cut into its low power mode. At 1 or 2 minutes after that, the motor just turned off completely. So I had to ride to the top, which I believe was called the Col de Reis, which is at 682 meters. It's a bit like that, but higher. Use your imagination. Oh, you don't need to. Here's a photo. From there it was downhill, followed by a series of undulations, and eventually we got onto the long descent down to Palencia, which was a lovely fast flowing road. Once we reached Palencia, we took the small roads back to our hotel, and that's where I did my final narrative to sum up how I and the bike get on with this epic ride. Anyway, I'll go over there now, well, at least in my imagination, and hopefully in yours too, and sum up. I'm now back at my hotel. Well, I know it's a bus shelter really, but we're still using our imagination, remember? And it's time to sum up how I and my hire e-bike got on with that epic ride. Personally, I didn't find it too challenging because, first of all, we took it very steadily. We only averaged about 20 kilometers an hour, and we had quite a lot of stops. In addition, of course, I had my e-bike, which took the load off of me to some extent. However, the e-bike didn't give me that much of an advantage because the ride was much hillier and longer than the e-bike could cope with. So ultimately I ran out of electricity. That meant that I actually only rode it with the motor on for around about 50 kilometers, and most of that was uphill and covered about 1,500 meters of climbing. The remaining 100 kilometers and about 1,000 meters of climbing I had to do under just human power, so as an ordinary muscle bike. I do spare a thought for my brother here, who did the whole ride just using his muscles. So how did the e-bike get on? Well, overall, I think it did reasonably well, considering it was a very challenging ride, and I really wasn't expecting the battery to last for the whole of the ride, and that's why I took the charger along with me. Now, one thing you can do for long rides is take a range extender with you, but the e-bike that I hired, you can't plug a range extender into. However, you can take a spare battery, which could be slipped in once the original battery was fully discharged. However, I didn't do that. I deliberately took along the charger to see how helpful that would be on such an epic ride. As it turned out, it was slightly useful, but not overwhelmingly useful. I plugged the charger in to the battery at Sa Calobra, and we left it in there for nearly an hour and a half, and that took the charge up from 0 to just over 40%. In order to fully charge the battery, it would have to been plugged in for around about 5 hours, which for most people is not really realistic while they're on a ride. So I think for most people, a spare battery or a range extender is probably the best bet. However, having said that, I sort of found the charger useful. It was useful in that it gave me extra charge in the battery, but it wasn't very useful in that it only charged the battery very slowly, and had I not had the charger with me, I probably would have got riding earlier and saved as much or more time from a longer riding period than I would have done from the advantage that the charging of the battery gave me. So my advice is, if you want to go on a long epic ride, take either a range extender battery with you or an extra battery. Only take the charger if you're going to stop for a substantial period of time. When I say substantial, I mean quite a few hours. For this ride, I would have been better off going to the hire company and trying to get an extra battery that I could have taken with me. In summary, for most of my rides in Mallorca, the standard battery, the standard 250 watt-hour battery, worked perfectly. It's only for those really epic rides that you would need a larger battery, a range extender battery, or if you've got enough time, take the charger with you. Anyway, I hope this was useful for you, but from me, for now, it's goodbye. Oh, I'll see you back in the UK. Not that we're there already, you understand.